Fear Seekers, and welcome back to the channel. Spirit boards have long been a subject of great interest to the general public, but that has only become more true as the years have gone by thanks to their regular inclusion in pop culture and paranormal media. Today, we're going to be diving into some disturbing, allegedly true, Ouija board horror stories. Now, it is a dream of mine to read subscriber horror stories someday. With that in mind, I'd ask that you subscribe to the channel and like the video so we can make that happen together. If you have any scary stories from your own life, feel free to submit them to the email in the description. I would be honored to read them. Now without further ado, sit back, put your planchettes away, and get ready to ferment your fears. I wanted to start out by saying this story is 100% true. I know people will say that to add immersion, but it really is, and this is the only place I knew where to post it at. Do I believe everything that happened actually happened? Not necessarily. I'm as skeptical as you will be, and I welcome any explanation as to how the events that occurred were not supernatural. It could have been an elaborate prank on behalf of my friends, but there are several reasons why I find that hard to believe. Mass hysteria, maybe? Who knows? Anyway, here is the story. I enlisted in the Army in 2009 and had my AIT, Advanced Individual Training, in Fort Huachuca, Arizona. Pretty much any soldier stationed at Fort Huachuca, often nicknamed Fort We Gotcha, has above average intelligence. Most of the MOSs require a very high ASVAB score. Needless to say, the friends I made were a unique bunch, many of us gaming nerds. Huachuca is about 20 minutes from the Mexican border and about 40 minutes from the infamous Tombstone, Arizona. One day we were bored and swapping ghost stories. One of my buddies bought a Ouija board at Walmart for us to play around with. We'll call him Jackson to protect his identity. I'm not sure Jackson believed in the supernatural, but when your disposable income to free time ratio is skewed horribly in the wrong direction, you buy stupid stuff to entertain yourself with. Jackson and I attempted to use the Ouija board in our barracks as the base is extremely old and rife with hauntings. Unfortunately, the barracks we had recently moved to were brand new, so the Ouija didn't work. Tired of strip clubs and flirting with the Mexican border, we hungered for a unique adventure. I brought up the idea of traveling to nearby Tombstone. Jackson lit up when I mentioned this as he had just heard a story of a haunted house in Tombstone he wanted to check out. We came to a quick, ghost hunting consensus and invited our buddy Thompson along for the ride. We arrived at Tombstone shortly after dark. It was not quite how I expected it. I had pictured a literal ghost town, with a few dilapidated Wild West buildings and the obligatory tumbleweed blowing through the street. This was not the case at all. Even at night, it's basically a normal town with a few historical buildings and tourist traps. In addition to the downtown stretch, they have a residential area just like any other small town in America. It was in this residential area that we began hunting for the supposed haunted house. We got to the area we thought it was in, but weren't sure which house it was. After a few minutes of circling the block, the group decided to take a break to use the bathroom. Everyone went a separate direction to pee, but I could not find a place private enough, so I didn't go. I was the second person back in the car. I climbed into the back seat and asked Jackson, "Where's Thompson?" "I don't know. He's been gone for a while. I'll text him," said Jackson. All of a sudden, Thompson, looking whiter than he normally does, comes sprinting towards the car, and frantically tries to open the passenger door. Jackson calmly unlocks the door, lets him in, and asks, "What happened?" "Dude, you're not gonna believe this," Thompson gasped. His southern drawl tightened like a cello string. "I was in this house that looked abandoned, right? So I go in and look around and decide to have a smoke. I look down at my phone to text you guys and tell you about it when all of a sudden something touched my shoulder." "Holy crap, what was it?" I asked. Nothing was there. I sprinted back to the car. Pumped with adrenaline, curiosity, and stupidity, I suggested we go full mystery machine and park in a nearby lot and use the Ouija board from inside the car. As soon as we could get parked, roughly half a block away, we anxiously pulled out the Ouija board and put it in our laps. As the person designated to ask questions, I began. "Is there anyone there?" To my disbelief, the planchette started moving. It slowly but surely moved towards yes. "Were you that thing that touched Thompson?" "Yes," it replied again. "Are you the ghost in the haunted house we were going to visit?" "No," it answered. Now this is what took me by surprise. If this was one of the others trying to scare us, why wouldn't they take the obvious bait, claim to be the ghost we saw, and commence scaring the crap out of us? I mean, that's like a Nigerian scammer writing you about your long-lost fortune and then responding no when you ask if he's able to give you $6 million instead of $5.5 million. At this point, I had a flashback of just about every creepy Ouija experience I had ever seen or read about. They always started with some cliche questions like, "How did you die?" and ended with, "Oh my god," and a flurry of telekinetic activity. I wanted this session to be different. After all, we were a hand-picked bunch of intelligent people, not a group of scared teenagers. If this was real, I wanted this specter to break history with me. So I took a moment and started thinking. What would I want to know about a ghost? What questions can I ask that aren't cliché? What can I ask that will break the linear decision tree where all Ouija boards end up telling you that they want you dead? I realized any questions I asked had to be extremely specific and offer no chance for creepy deviation in the answer. I suppose I could ask it for the coefficient of pi and it could just respond with "die" over and over, but I had faith in the ghost. So the first question I asked was, "Name one thing the building you touched Thompson in was used for." The planchette slowly started to move again. Huh, I thought to myself. This thing can't possibly get creepy from this question. I bet it will say like general store or post office or slaughter. Pucker factor 9. Good game, ghost. Have an upvote, I guess. But seriously, I again realized this was probably not one of us joking around because slaughter has not been used as a common term since the 1800s. You don't log on to CNN and see, "Man slaughtered today in small house in Arizona, details at 11. If my friends were pulling a prank, the easiest verb would have been something like murder. Intrigued, I decided to ask it why it touched Thompson. "Help," it replied. Thinking this would lead somewhere creepy, I asked when it died instead. 1867. I again started thinking of questions I could ask that no one ever thinks to ask a ghost. I remember hearing on some website that you are never supposed to ask a Ouija board about God, so I did the only logical thing an atheist would do at that point. Why aren't I supposed to ask you about God? "No," came a quick, terse reply. So I tried to be more creative. I asked it, "If you were playing World of Warcraft, what class would you play?" "It's gonna say Undead Warlock. I guarantee it." "No," it snapped again. It was weird. Despite being an entity that couldn't directly talk to us, you could almost sense its tone of voice through how it moved the planchette. I wanted to continue asking it questions, but our first sergeant interrupted the session with a frantic phone call. He ordered all of us back to base for 100% accountability due to someone losing their weapon. Disappointed, we packed up and headed back. The next day, we were telling others in our platoon about our experience the night before. After many "that's nonsense" and eye rolls, another soldier named Green showed interest. We decided to try to talk to the ghost again and take Green with us. He had an SUV which would give us more room to set up the board. As a soldier, my first instinct was not only to plan our arrival and departure time, but safety contingencies as well. This was especially on my mind after the previous night. I briefed the group in advance that if anything creepy happened, we were better off with a pre-identified plan on what to do so as to take the spirits by surprise. Our ghost hunting SOP was as follows. At approximately 2,000 hours, we will depart for Tombstone. This will allow us to arrive at dark. We will take 2 vehicles, Green's SUV and Jackson's coupe. Jackson and Thompson will ride in the coupe, while Green and I will ride in the SUV. We will set up our session in the SUV so as to allow for a quick departure if anything spooky happens. We will leave any weapons or sharp objects back at the base. Spirits can only harm others by proxy. If there are no objects around to throw, or possess someone into using, then the only physical danger will be soiling our underwear. In the event one of us is feeling creeped out beyond belief, or an impending sense of doom, we will give an obvious signal to the others to quickly pack up and leave. Each soldier will return to the vehicle they traveled in and take off back to the base. Upon leaving the scene, the vehicles will immediately establish contact via cell phone to ensure safety and share in a moment of, "Holy crap, what the hell just happened?" So it was settled. We had our plan and were feeling confident. The undead were no match for Arizona's finest soldiers. We parked in the same lot we had the night before and eagerly took out our Ouija board. There were 4 of us now and we were feeling confident, but I won't lie and tell you that I wasn't jittery as hell. Literally everything I knew about life in the universe at this point was challenged by what we had seen the previous night. I felt like the equivalent of someone who discovers a 6-inch tall genie in their closet that only they can talk to. It literally felt surreal, like a movie. Green was especially nervous about being with us as he was raised Catholic. Though he was no longer religious, he still had that strongly ingrained fear of Ouija boards. Green opted to just spectate as we placed the planchette on the board. There were 3 of us controlling it. We started by asking if anyone was there and received a very slow, strained yes. I asked if it was the same being we had talked to the previous night, and it said no. Going off the same theme as last night, I wanted to mess with the ghost a bit. I did not want to give it the opportunity to be creepy, and I wanted it to answer questions no one would think to ask. I wanted to expose the ghost's vulnerabilities. As of now, the ghost was this mysterious, all-powerful being. However, as any logical person knows, the paranormal is just science not yet discovered. The ghost must have limits, I thought. It isn't God, and therefore has things it cannot do, things it cannot have. So I had the bright idea to ask, what is one thing you want that you cannot have? Life, it answered. I wasn't sure whether to feel like an ass, idiot, or both. Before I could decide between shame and stupidity, the interior light in Green's brand new SUV flickered. Holy crap. That doesn't just happen. The only time I've ever seen a light flicker in a car was when it was being started. This was getting a little too real. This spirit was alpha, and it was asserting its ethereal dominance. After regaining my composure, I began to brainstorm more questions. "You've been asking it all the questions. Let me give it a try," Thompson contested me. "Fine, go ahead," I said. "What do you want from us?" he asked, in his defiant Georgia accent."STEV. Dude, there's no way," I thought to myself. My name is Stephen and all, but there is no E-N. At this point, I was terrified. No one there knew my first name but Thompson. Also, the planchette was moving in a puppeted fashion, away from Thompson when it spelled it out. The best way I could describe it was an invisible thread, straight from the front of the car pulling the planchette, based on how it twisted and turned. There was no one in the front of the car. Before I could even react, the center console, which was about 5 inches ajar, closed by itself. I calmly invoked our military plan of action. Okay guys, it just spelled out my first name. Let's get the hell out of here. No one said a word or hesitated for a second. Thompson and Jackson scrambled out of the SUV and into Jackson's Eclipse. Green and I piled into the front of the SUV. Green immediately shifted to drive and peeled out of the dusty lot. I'm not sure if Ford Escape has ever been used in such a literal fashion. Green was in shock, and so was I. My atheist brain was questioning if God might actually be real, and Green's devout brain was pondering the opposite. Our trance was broken by Green's alt-rock ringtone. It was surreal hearing pop culture in that moment, when our brains were so far removed from reality. Green answered the phone. It was Jackson and Thompson. Their car wouldn't start. They had never left Tombstone. Green slams on the brakes and bangs a U-turn that would put Vin Diesel in diapers. He floors the modest SUV. We were going about 100 miles per hour, heading down Arizona 82 back towards Tombstone. "Dude, slow the hell down," I yelled. At this point, I was more afraid of Green's driving than the spirits. "They're our friends. We can't leave them there." We knew the general direction back to Tombstone and arrived rather quickly. Tombstone isn't as tiny as you'd imagine, and we couldn't quite remember where we had parked at. As I am trying to figure out where we are, Green freaks the hell out. "Oh my god." "What, dude?" "I can't. I'm not driving the car anymore." "What the hell are you talking about?" "I can't move." As if it couldn't get any more frightening, I realized in the middle of Green's outburst that we had inadvertently ended up at the parking lot we left. I'm always trying to think logically, so I deduced the following. At this point, 2 things are possible. Green is possessed by a butthurt ghost who basically told me to check my living privilege. Or, Green is experiencing a psychotic breakdown. Either one of those is a threat to our safety at this point, so I just started shouting at him with simple commands. If he was possessed or simply psychotic, simple instructions were the best course of action. "Green, stop the car." "Green, stop the car." "Stop the car," I ordered in a commanding voice. Eventually, logic and reason fought off whatever had possessed him and he pulled over. I switched seats with him and began driving. Right after I took over driving, Jackson called and let us know they were safe, and about 10 miles down the road towards base. Green was still in a trance, but once we got about a quarter mile from ground zero, whatever triggered him without warning originally had left. This leads me to believe that if ghosts are real, they have the effective possession range of a quarter mile. Throughout the ride, we struggled to comprehend what had happened that night. Green told me that he could tell the ghost wanted me, and that it was telling him to drive down an alley, but that he came to his senses in time. He said it wanted me bad, and it wanted him to kill me. It probably would have had him attack me before we left, but our premeditated escape took it by surprise, so it stalled Jackson's car to lure us back. I asked him why it didn't just kill me itself, and he told me, "Probably because I'm bigger than you, and more emotional. You think very logically. You're a lot harder for a spirit to manipulate. Plus I was in control of the car." This made sense and was pretty chilling to think about. If the spirit had succeeded, it would have simply hit the news as "Soldier murders other soldier in Tombstone, PTSD suspected." I imagine that's the case when you hear about mothers spontaneously drowning their children in a bathtub or other inexplicable murder-suicides. It's probably a ghost or spirit, but gets blamed on psychosis. About halfway back to base, we stopped at a gas station. Green, still not completely in his right mind, opened the hatch of his SUV, took out a sunshade that came with his car, and threw it in the dumpster. "What did you do that for?" "I don't know. It just felt evil. Really evil," he answered. That was the final straw on how real this was. It really drove in how much this was probably not an elaborate prank. Why would he go to the extent of throwing away an expensive OEM part of his car to freak me out when I was already emotionally exhausted? To this day, I am still an atheist, but I do wonder about the paranormal, as it could very well be science not yet discovered. I would imagine that communicating with the spirit is the equivalent of trying to talk to an invisible man in the room, who cannot touch anything. His only way of communicating is holding a portable fan and blowing paper suspended by a string from the ceiling. He blows it right for yes and left for no. I imagine this is why they communicate in such slow and brief answers. I did a little more research on the location and posted a map and pictures for you guys below. Ironically, we were in the parking lot for the OK Corral, the famous haunted location where the outlaws had their shootout in the 1800s. From what I can gather, the gunfight happened well after 1867, but keep in mind we talked to two separate spirits. I can't help but wonder if the second one was one of them. Here is a map showing key points of interest. Here is the street view of the parking lot we were in. Also, I have heard of the ideomotor effect, so if you would like to help me come up with logical explanations for what happened, keep in mind I am aware of that, and it does not explain the light flickering and the console moving. I am also aware of Occam's razor, and would welcome a shave at this point as I think it would save my sanity. So please, convince me I'm crazy. This happened to me when I was in high school. I was at my friend's house at the time, who lived in an apartment building. She had a neighbor who lived upstairs and was a few years younger than us who we hung out with when I visited my friend's apartment. On this specific day, my friend's neighbor mentioned that she had a Ouija board and asked if we wanted to use it with her. We both agreed, as I personally didn't think Ouija boards were actually paranormal and just thought it was a myth. We went into a garage area of the apartment building and put our fingers on the planchette. For the first few hours, nothing really eventful happened. Eventually, we had movement on the planchette and started asking questions to the spirit who would answer us. I forgot who, but someone asked if the spirit was trying to communicate with any of us. Interestingly enough, it spelled out my name. I was skeptical and thought it was one of my friends messing with me, so I asked what its name was. It then spelled out my grandmother's name, who died 6 months before this Ouija board encounter. I started getting a little uncomfortable as my grandmother's name is in another language, and my friends did not know this language, nor have I ever told them what her name was. They wouldn't even know how to spell it either. Weirded out, I asked what my grandmother wanted. She started spelling out URGR, and then the planchette started going in weird circles and even going off of the board, and was not spelling out anything that made sense. So I asked for further clarification, and then it just said, "You are great." This will be important later, so keep this in mind. Anyway, I just thought it was just us moving it weirdly and then said goodbye. A few days later, my grandmother's husband, my grandfather suddenly passed away. It was unexpected as he was in great health and was right before Christmas, and he was so excited for Christmas. As I was at his funeral, I remember sitting there and thinking about the Ouija board, and that's when it hit me. When the Ouija board, or my grandmother, initially tried to spell out something that started with GR, I realized that grandfather starts with GR. But then the planchette moved around weirdly when my grandmother couldn't spell out the rest of the word, as if something was stopping my grandmother from completing the word and warning me. The next few months were hell, as I started blaming myself and was convinced that I somehow contributed to my grandfather's death by using this board. It got to the point that I became suicidal, and the scary part is, my thoughts felt as if they weren't mine. It felt as if something was trying to lead me to taking my own life, as they were very dark. I can't explain it, as it might have been guilt, but I felt like something was watching me all the time, and I felt a strange presence in the next few months after using the board. There is also the fact that the night of when I used the Ouija board, I was in the bathroom and I was underneath some lights. I had a strange feeling and felt that I needed to walk away. Right when I did, the light shattered and would have injured me if I was standing underneath. I eventually confessed to my mother about the Ouija board experience, and right when I did, I felt a giant weight off of my shoulders. The negative and dark thoughts were slowly disappearing, and I started to not feel the dark presence anymore when I overcame these thoughts. However, I was still wondering if the spirit I contacted was even my grandmother. I also wondered if I was imagining this dark presence and the dark thoughts I had. Fast forward, I was at an overnight event at my school and another friend brought a Ouija board. I decided to use it one more time with this friend and find some answers. At one point, the Ouija board said it was trying to contact me specifically. When we asked who it was, it then started spelling out DEV. We started panicking, but then it spelled out to a word that I forgot. I dismissed it and thought it was nothing, but my friend decided to look up the word. A few weeks later, she told me that the word meant devil in another language. It was then it was confirmed to me that it might not have been my grandmother who was contacting me the first time. There is also the fact that there may have been something that was trying to get to me, and that it did not have good intentions. To this day, I am convinced that this spirit only tried to warn me about my grandfather so that when he passed, I would feel guilty. By feeling guilty, I was more vulnerable to this spirit's influences, to the point that I would almost take my own life. I do not know if this was what actually happened, but it's the only logical explanation I have. This is a story from my life that I've told to people, especially teens, to warn them to never use the Ouija board. It's long, but I hope it serves that purpose here. When I was a senior in high school in 1989, my brother came home from college on spring break and told stories about him and some friends using the Ouija board. It had done some things to freak them out, so we dug out the one we had in our attic. I don't know why we had it or where we got it from. He showed me what they had done, but nothing happened with us. I brought it to a friend's house and we tried it a few times over the course of a few evenings, and then about the third or fourth time, it really started to pick up in its responses. We had been starting by knocking 3 times in the corner of the board and saying something like, "Come, spirit," or something to that effect. Anyway, the marker started to really move around the board and spell things out. I always tell people that it was either our subconsciousness or spirit moving it around, because I was certain neither of us was moving it intentionally. With a light touch of a few fingers from each of our hands, it would just move to spell things like its own personality. We would ask it all the usual questions, test questions and curiosity ones. One day, though I wasn't a fan of it, my friend asked the board in which years we would each die. It spelled out something like 2040 or 40-ish for my friend. I actually don't remember the number, just that it was far in the future at the time. And 1990 for me, which was the following year. I asked, "Does that mean I'm going to die in 1990 and my friend in 2040? "No," it said. Then I asked again, this time switching the years around between us. "Yes," it said. We asked the spirit about itself. It said it died the year my friend's father was born, and said its name was Stephen Crane. We kinda laughed at that part. Of course, I looked up some dates about the author after that, but things just didn't seem to jive. I thought, could be another person with that name, and moved on. Anyway, we started to invite friends over to watch, who were all entirely skeptical. By the end of the evening, every single one was freaked out. More and more friends would come each night, until we started getting a huge group of people. The board would answer plenty of the test questions wrong, but then, for example, while everyone's reacting to the wrong answer and half paying attention, it's spelling out sorry. And another time, for example, in a lull between activity while people are distracted and chatting, it moved slowly to S, then kept circling around to HHHHH until it came to a stop there. Nothing for about 2 minutes. The entire room of people completely silent. Then, it slowly moved to OK. It said a bad spirit had passed through the room. Everyone freaked out. It didn't like this one friend, and every time he entered the room when we had those gatherings, the marker would twist and move to the opposite side of the board. And other things like that happened. Again, it had its own personality. I remember a few times driving home alone with that thing in the back seat of the car, terrified with my heart pounding. One time I asked it, "Where will I go to college?" It spelled out one of the schools I was applying to, and then 37. I asked if I was going to go to that school and get a 3.7 GPA the first semester, and it said yes. I was sure all along that my friend wasn't moving it intentionally, but I had proof because one day he was really disturbed and frustrated with his girlfriend, a friend of mine. He had suspected she was cheating on him, and asked the board a question about her, while using it with a friend, and it told him to turn on the TV. The video for the song "What You Don't Know Might Hurt You" by Expose was playing on MTV. I remember he really took that to heart, and it affected his trust in their relationship. So, I always knew he wasn't just playing around with the board, and that was a sort of hard proof of it. We started to actually use the board with our friends, but it only worked when one of us two used it with someone. We asked the spirit why that was, and it responded that the spirit was inside my friend and that I was the owner of the board. Freaky stuff thinking back on it now, but as an 18-year-old you think differently. Anyway, the enthusiasm started to peter out after a few months, maybe near the end of the summer, and I don't know what happened to the Ouija board. I did end up going to that college that the board had mentioned, but it didn't really catch my attention. When I got home from my first semester, after 1990 had just begun, I got my grades. I got a 3.7. I don't remember if I made the connection or not, but I certainly did when the next thing happened. Around the same week or thereabouts, maybe even around the same day, I got the annual catalog that my college sends out with articles and updates and whatnot. I opened it up, and there in front of me was a whole article about Stephen Crane. He had gone to my college for a while, and I never had any idea about it. I remember having chills. 10 years later, I was buying a condo and a lot of serendipitous things, good things, were happening around the purchase. That event with the Ouija board was so salient with me that I decided to do a good search to find out if a Stephen Crane had lived in the condo I was buying. I didn't find anything, and the condo was great, but if I had found something, I would definitely have pulled out of the PNS. Finally, the sad part is that later in 1990, after returning to college classes after Thanksgiving break, my friend, one of my best friends, died suddenly and unexpectedly from a heart problem. I don't know when I made the connection with the board, because by then it was over a year later, but at some point I did, and when I started to put the whole storyline together, it sank in more how creepy and dark the whole thing is. I am happy in life, very blessed. I did go through a form of spiritual growth some years ago where this darkness was left behind, and this story of my past doesn't haunt me. I share it in the hope it's helpful for others, but I would never touch a Ouija board again, and would strongly advise against anyone using one. To this day, I am still positive that it was not our conscious action at work, but either our subconsciousness or truly a spirit. So whichever of those you might believe it is, nothing good comes from playing around with either of them. At the minimum, negligence can open up a path for psychological and emotional problems, and at the worst, relating with a spirit can let in a darkness and fear beyond your understanding or strength that can tint your life and affect you for many years to come. After reflecting on the post, I wanted to add more context for the reason for posting and choice of title. I mentioned a few times that I thought the source of the board's movement was either subconsciousness or spiritual/paranormal. As a person of religious faith with a science and engineering background, I still do think that it was one or the other, or a mixture of both. I have a great respect for both the human sciences and human spiritual wisdom, and both of these have always had guidance, in the form of professional individuals and/or community experience, for a reason. Psychology and spirituality can be very deep and heavy, so they can be quite dangerous and harmful if practiced without experienced guidance. The problem with the Ouija board is that it is mass-produced and marketed as an innocent game, for kids aged 8+, which is not only an insult to both science professionals and human wisdom traditions, but also creates the dangerous situations of people playing with their psyche when they are not equipped to process the consequences. Under the branding of innocent game, Ouija boards can make it into the homes and hands of unprepared, unguided people, causing psychological and spiritual damage. I think it's reckless and negligent on the part of the manufacturers, so I don't so much blame the Ouija board as I do them. So, I hope my story presents one example in all of that context, and that is why I say, don't use it. This is going to be a long one because it's two separate stories rolled into one long post. Obligatory apology for formatting because I'm on my phone. So, I've had 3 separate experiences with the Ouija board that I cannot explain. People. Me and my boyfriend, 19. And boyfriend's little sister and friends, 14 to 16. Anyway, rewind to about 2017. My boyfriend's little sister was having some sort of get-together. Me and my boyfriend showed up to his place around midnight after doing our own thing. His little sis, we'll call her Ray, was playing the Ouija board with a bunch of her friends, and they were all freaking out. I was bored, so I figured I'd join in. As soon as I joined, we all started getting phone calls from an anonymous number, and the planchette was moving, but I have a hard time believing someone wasn't pushing it. I found the calls weird because I didn't know any of these kids, so there was no one that could share a phone number with all these kids and me. I thought about the mom and my boyfriend, so I grabbed their phones and put them in front of me and kept playing. Their phones got calls too. Sometimes it would be one person, and other times as many as 3 of us would get calls at the same time. When we would answer them, it would just be static for a few seconds and then it would hang itself up. This continued happening until we finished with the board. A few weeks later, I had pretty much forgotten about the incident. Me, my boyfriend, and a few of his friends all decided to take a late-night walk to the cemetery near my boyfriend's house. As soon as we entered the cemetery, we started getting the no caller ID phone calls again. All of us. It was strange because no one knew we were going to the cemetery, and my boyfriend's friends weren't present when we had done the board. The calls continued until we left. And that was it for the calls until just recently, starting about 2 weeks ago. Ray had 2 of her friends over, and I was there just waiting for my boyfriend to get off of work. So we all decided to try the board again. We kept getting this Zozo and Mama thing, and the girls would freak out and make us say goodbye every time those names appeared. They said it was a demon or something. I still don't quite believe the planchette moves on its own, but anyway, we ended up contacting this heartbroken spirit named Daryl, and we talked to him for a while. He seemed intelligent and knew some things the girls wouldn't know, and so that was strange. This whole time we were all getting those calls. Even the home phone went off, and no one had that number. We did this a few more times over the spring break, speaking to this Daryl each time. It was whatever, still getting the phone calls each time. But then the calls started happening on their own, all the time. They would happen on my boyfriend's phone at 7 a.m., and he never played with the board. All us girls would get them at the same time every day for days. Sometimes one of us would get them non-stop for minutes at a time. We would ignore them and they would just keep coming, just all the time, out of the blue, especially when 2 or more of us who had played were in the same room. They are still happening, so here's where the second part becomes relevant. Ever since the second to last time playing the board, I've had really disturbing thoughts right before bed. I can't explain how it really is. It's like mini horror movies playing out vividly in my head every time I try to sleep. For instance, have you ever seen those creepy videos where it's a bunch of disturbing little clips put together to some unnerving music? Kinda like the video from The Ring? But some have commentary. It's just the strangest thing. I've been having to play music to fall asleep to, so I can sing the lyrics in my head to keep these images out. Any advice on what to do here? I have never been superstitious, or believed in ghosts before, and I'm not religious, so I don't think a cleansing or anything would help. Is there a possibility there's something wrong with me? I never have these images while awake. The calls I just cannot explain. They are just so strange. I don't even have Ray's number, so I have no idea how someone could have all these 14 to 16-year-olds' numbers that I've never heard of and mine, my boyfriend's, their mother's, and the home phone. It's been a few months and the calls are still happening, but with more time in between them. I played the board again with a few of my own sister's friends at her birthday party, none of whom were present at the first sessions, and they all started getting calls as well. Other than that, the only other experience I've had was watching a lighter, placed in the middle of a table, slowly drag itself off of it. There was no one else around to witness this. We were just watching television when it just randomly started happening. This is all a bit weird, but the nighttime scariness has ceased. Not sure what to think of any of this. If it is something, it seems harmless. Hey guys, glad to see you made it to the end of the video. Have you or someone you know ever dabbled around with a Ouija board and contacted someone or something from beyond the grave? Make sure to let me know in the comments below. As always, if you have any scary stories you'd like to be told, be sure to send them in. Did you like the video? A thumbs up goes a long way. Did you love the video? Perhaps consider subscribing. I post new videos 3 times a week, so there's never a shortage of content. Alright guys, that just about wraps up the video. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. So long, Fear Seekers. I'll see you in the next video.